Welcome to RotoGrinders Today. I'm Jordan Cooper, a.k.a. BlenderHD, BlenderHD. If you're going to follow me on Twitter. And it's Friday, February 9th. We'll be taking a look at the big game on Sunday. There's a big game, John, going on Sunday. I don't know what it's called, but I know it's going to be big. It's going to be the 49ers and the Chiefs. There's going to be Travis Kelce. There's going to be Taylor Swift. There's going to be some football played. It may be a super time. Maybe you're putting your pretzels and your cheese puffs and your if you're healthy, maybe some broccoli sticks and celery. You may be putting it in a bowl of some type. So you may be feeling super while you're eating snacks from a bowl, but there is a big game going on Sunday, and we'll be looking at the DraftKings showdown slate for it. Hit that thumbs up button on your way in the door. Hit the thummy thumbs, hit the likey likes, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. Always know when we go live. John, the Super Bowl showdown slate seems not as compelling as I if you look at our sims, not as compelling as I would think it would be, where I think there's a good shot that no one's winning this solo.
Yeah. Right. So I was actually kind of looking at that. Yes, like the DraftKings contest in particular, that it's massive. And I actually don't know that I'm as worried about duplication like for that particular contest as much as I would be. Just because it pays $1 million first place, but it's so big that the payout structure doesn't fall off. A lot of times it's like $1 million to first, 100,000 to to second, and then it's like $5 to third or whatever. And like this one actually is like tiered down, and so I think if you finish in first place and tie with 20 people, it's still like an $84,000 payout. So like maybe you aren't actually that concerned with duplication, and there's maybe a thought you should go chalkier for that big contest than you would otherwise. And thinking maybe there's a lot more casual users. So try to get an edge with projections, and don't worry about duplication. Just a thought I had.
Well, I could push back just a little, because remember, DFS is a game played with multiple variables, right? And we talk about the number one variable. I say this in my course, theoryofdfs.com. The number one variable is the skill gap between you and your opponents. That is the number one variable. I know projection, leverage, correlation. But at the end of the day, if your opponents are going to play 6 injured players, it's not hard to win. But the thing is that the skill gap is more apparent on slates where there are more decisions. The more decisions you have to make. If you take a look at any game, the difference between a game like Candyland, which is all luck-based because there's no decisions to be made, technically one, the little slide, if you don't choose, obviously everyone chooses the slide, but it's basically who could roll a dice better. Yeah. All the way up to chess, where there's so many decisions, or Magic the Gathering or something like that, where maybe that Magic has a little luck involved, but chess has no luck involved, that the more decisions that need to be made, the bigger the skill gap could be. If this was like a 10-game slate, this is a normal NFL slate, right? Obviously, there's so many more decisions. There's so many ways for casual players, for bad players to go wrong. Do you really think there's that many ways? Like, if you used most of your salary, is there a way for even a bad opponent? Like, what could be so bad? Because every lineup that I try to make, I've been doing for the past day, that uses like 48,000 or more, like it's all like kind of the same. Like it's.
Yeah.
Like if I were just to randomly build lineups like that, they're not going to project that poorly. So how are we taking advantage of the less skillful players, other than making lineups that they're not willing to make weirder, but obviously that'll be lower projected?
I'd say that like usually for a showdown thing, I might think something like, oh, I can't use all the salary, and because that lineup might be too duplicated. Whereas maybe you throw that rule out the window for this, like thinking like it's okay if I duplicate with like 19 people and win $84,000. So maybe you're, kind of avoiding. You've got two pretty concentrated offenses So maybe you don't need to go to like the Juwan Jennings, like Justin Watson type players that other people might click on for savings. Like maybe those guys are, not as relevant as, they seem like they're not going to be relevant. And you just focus on like the main core 9 guys across the 2 teams.
Do you think maybe the edge on the quote casuals, as we bring up the lineup HQ, is the captain stuff? I mean, because I'm looking at we have, obviously, if you're a premium member here, you get all of our projections, our ownership, our showdown HQ, our sim labs. You could run our sims for this game, all different combinations, anything you want to do. So take advantage of that. Even Alex Santi has an article on DFS tips and what he's been looking at when it comes to the NFL sims and how to use our tools. But I mean, the number one thing we could see here, I could just bring this up. I know this is premium content, but we only have 1 game, so why not? This is stuff that you could get for NBA. We have PGA sim labs now, so you can use our PGA sims. But I mean, the overwhelming thing that we see here is that like the captain, like, look at this. I mean, Christian McCaffrey, it's so far ahead of so many other players. And then it's like Rashee Rice, Isaiah Pacheco, Travis Kelce. The noticeable thing is that quarterback captain is like way low.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the type of thing that would, obviously it's going to be way low. I think the sharper players are going to be under on quarterback captains, but could it be possible that because this is, such a big contest with a lot of, rando entries, that maybe the casual, if we want to call it that, are more likely to play a quarterback and captain, and that may be suboptimal for their ownership?
Yeah, I think so, especially with Patrick Mahomes. I think a lot of people will be going there. The Chiefs offense hasn't been, as crazy explosive as we've seen in years past. So maybe that's a player you want to go underweight is Patrick Mahomes and the captain. And we've started to see things focus a lot more, right, on like Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice, without the periphery guys getting involved. So whereas it used to be like, well, who can pick from the Chiefs wide receivers? Well, now we kind of can. So, it's Rashee Rice. So, and actually, I think that's one of the more interesting stats, just getting to like Rashee Rice. One of the more interesting stats I saw that I put in the expert survey is that, San Francisco allowed the 4th most receptions, but the fewest yards per reception in the NFL this year. And so maybe you try to get like Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice, and you figure you're getting the Chiefs passing game, and you're not as worried about taking Patrick Mahomes. That would be a way that you're getting different from the field, but not getting crazy.
Well, one of the things that you do say in the expert survey kind of lines up with the sims that we have here at RotoGrinders. If we take a look at the roster construction breakdown of like what's the top 0.1% optimal outcomes, the 49ers are favored in this game. I mean, a 2.5-point favorite. It skews very much heavily. I mean, look, it's very rare to see like 15% optimal. Like 49ers onslaughts are 6% optimal. Chiefs onslaughts are 15% optimal, and not even if they win the game. So like 2 favorites, 4 dogs, 1 favorite, 5 dogs. It aligns with the fact that you said that you think, and you're backing it up based on, the data, that it's quite possible that the 49ers win this game, but the offense is very condensed through McCaffrey or McCaffrey plus one other person. And then the Chiefs, like from a DraftKings perspective, PPR scoring, like you may not have maybe you don't even have a single receiver that gets 100 yards, but Rashee Rice is like 9 for 90, and Kelce is 9 for 85, and Justin Watson has 4 catches, and MVS has 5, like a lot of receptions, but maybe not. Maybe Mahomes doesn't pass over 300 yards, and just due to the nature of PPR scoring, that more Chiefs appear in optimal lineups than the 49ers do.
Yeah, definitely. And like those receptions count, particularly on DraftKings for, a full point. It's a 10-yard run every time they, get a wide receiver screen and get stuck to the line of scrimmage or whatever. It's as good as a 10-yard run. So yeah, I think that is a possibility that like the Kansas City maybe doesn't put a bunch of points on the board, but they can put up a bunch of fantasy points by just getting receptions. And Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice are particularly like, they profile particularly well for that kind of lineup, and even Isaiah Pacheco a little bit, right? Like he's been the main guy in the backfield, and so it's an interesting thing. Maybe Mahomes is going to be overowned due to the idea that like they're not going to necessarily profile to score a ton of touchdowns, but maybe they still put up a bunch of fantasy points with underneath passes to Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice.
Now, if you're going to build a lineup that has a Christian McCaffrey, has a Travis Kelce, has a Pacheco, has Rashee Rice, has people up at the top, I mean, you're going to have to find some. I mean, you're going to have to play some cheap guy. So taking a look underneath the kickers and the defenses, and we'll talk about them in a second. What are the guys that you're looking at that stand out the most? Obviously, when you're paying that little for a player, like if you just get a touchdown in that spot, like you're probably good. So I don't think anyone is like you're willing to X out, because I mean, dude, Charlie Warner could score on some play action on the goal line type of thing. So I don't want to rule out like anyone, but who would be the top targets if you need a cheap guy, if you need basically someone like MVS down, 3K down? Are you target? I mean, to me, the targets would be the Chiefs guys, right?
Yeah, I think so. Well, so I think there's a couple of guys, on each team. I think MVS is actually pretty good for 3,000. He's probably the main Chiefs receiver outside of Rashee Rice at this point. I think he played the most snaps. So, he's got a couple big catches so far in the playoffs. He's obviously not putting up like huge scores, right? But for 3,000, that's pretty decent, and it allows you to get fill out the roster with some of the other primary offensive players. In terms of real cheapies, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is only 1,200. It looks like Jerick McKinnon's like probably not going to come back. I think he could be activated tomorrow, but I think the injury to something like it seems like a long shot or something like that. So like kind of solidify Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 1,200 as like a reasonable play. Kyle Juszczyk at 800. He's been getting a handful of receptions. I think 2 receptions in their last playoff game. So he's always on the field. It's just a question of, is he going to get anything at all? I mean, he could get totally blanked on the box score, but like that's okay at 800. I mean, you don't want him to get blanked, but he could score a touchdown too, right? Because he's on the field. So if he scores it, like you said, if he scores a touchdown at 800, that's a big difference maker. And then Richie James is at 400. Maybe like it's a little bit more tenuous. He's a slot receiver, so he's only 400. I like much prefer Juszczyk if I have the extra $400. But Richie James is a guy that, especially with to see the status of like the Chiefs wide receivers, because we don't know out of like Darius Toney, Sky Moore, I think like Justin Ross is still alive too. Like you got to see if all of those guys are in play, then maybe Richie James isn't as much of a factor. But like let's say Sky Moore isn't activated or isn't active for the game, and if like Darius Toney's not active for the game, then maybe Richie James isn't play.
How about the ultra leverage play for large field? Elijah Mitchell, 2,800.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I like Elijah Mitchell as much at 2,800 as I like Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 1,200. They're probably about the same guy. I think like Clyde Edwards-Helaire seems to mix in a little bit more on like your average game, whereas like Christian McCaffrey just gets everything. Like he'll just get all the running back touches. I'd almost prefer Juszczyk or Clyde Edwards-Helaire to Eli Mitchell. But I see what you're saying, and you never know, right? If there's an in-game injury, then injuries happen.
Well, do you think it has to be an in-game injury? I mean, because some people will look at past games. I mean, logic would I mean, to me, common sense, it's the Super Bowl, right? It's the big game or whatever you want to call it. I don't know if we're allowed to call it the bowl that is super. Like, Christian McCaffrey's not coming off the field. I mean, like what are they saving him for? Oh, he needs to, I mean, unless he says I need a break, I mean, I don't see Elijah Mitchell getting many carries.
No, yeah. So I'm like, Elijah Mitchell's probably my least favorite of the Chief guys that'll be active and are reasonable. I'd rather go to like Noah Gray, or one of the really cheap Chiefs wide receivers.
Okay, how about the kickers and the defenses? I think the kickers and the defenses are going to go under-owned on this slate, and I mean, it's showdown. People are building lineups as if this game is going to be something more like 27-20, 28-24, that type, around the total. But what happens, these defenses aren't bad, right? I mean, these are pretty. Chiefs defense is good. The 49ers defense is pretty decent. I mean, these aren't bad. They're not the greatest of defense, but they're not the bad defense. The kickers are good. They're priced up in the 5Ks a little bit more. Who says this game isn't like, each team kicks 4 field goals and there's only 2 touchdowns and the game is like, 19-16 or, something like that. Maybe a defensive touchdown. Are you building any lineups that, I mean, obviously the large field you probably are. You got to build some lineups for those types of scenarios because those lineups that you build are going to be significantly lower projected from a median standpoint, but that game outcome, I mean, we've seen plenty of showdown slates where, within the first 5 minutes, it's defensive touchdown, and then some weird guy scores an 82-yard touchdown, and everyone's looking at themselves going, I don't know if I have any live showdown lineups left.
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of surprised to see the kickers in our sim labs not having positive leverage. Because like Harrison Butker and Jake Moody are both like capable kickers. It's a close game, like 2-point spread. So you have to figure it could be tied or 1-2 point difference in the fourth quarter. And both kickers are capable of hitting like 50-yard field goals. So that's almost a touchdown right there. So I was a little bit surprised not to see the kickers with higher leverage. Kind of an interesting thing. I think like Butker is cheaper on DraftKings and Moody's cheaper on FanDuel for what it's worth.
But they're both expensive. I think the Sims, it's more of a byproduct of price. I mean, we typically don't see kickers at 5K. We typically see them at 3,800, 4,000. And I think if they were a little bit cheaper, because it's hard to play these. I mean, I tried finagling some lineups. It's, you get to the point where like you might as well just go up and get Rashee Rice or George Kittle or, Pacheco or something like that. That extra 1,000. I mean, it's tight. I mean, the defenses seem more worthwhile to me because at least they're cheaper. Chiefs defense 3,400. I mean, it's Brock Purdy. It's not, no offense to him, but he's not the best quarterback in this game.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of lean a little bit more towards the kickers. They are a little bit more expensive. I feel like DraftKings about mid-year started pricing up the kickers. So, it used to be like you get like a 3,800 kicker, and now you're seeing them more like 4,800, 5,000, 5,200. I guess it's 2 pretty competent offenses that don't generally give up a ton of like defensive points. I think San Francisco was like last in points allowed to defenses, and like you don't necessarily. I mean, it's a Super Bowl, right, or the big game, as you may choose to call it. But these are 2 really good teams, 2 really good offenses. They don't make a ton of mistakes. You can always see like a kick return for a touchdown, or any fumble return for a touchdown. Those things can happen. I kind of think the defenses should be cheaper than the kickers, and they are. So I don't think like they're super negative leverage or anything like that. I do prefer getting to the kickers.
Okay, so McCaffrey heavily capped. I mean, our Sims say McCaffrey by far the top captain. Leverage on McCaffrey. I know I joked around about Eli Mitchell, but CW89, I like Debo at captain. Do you think that in a non-McCaffrey lineup? So let's talk about this. Christian McCaffrey lineup, non-Christian McCaffrey lineup, because obviously not playing Christian McCaffrey is going to make you different because he's going to be he's going to be very mega owned, and rightfully so. His projection is stupid high. But if you're not going to play Christian McCaffrey, I don't see anyone that benefits more, that takes points away, would be Debo, only because Debo is much more likely to get those jet sweep type rushing, short screen, 2-yard screen to the house, pseudo rushing type of plays that if you're not going to play McCaffrey, you play Samuel. But the question is, if you do play McCaffrey, isn't that negatively correlated to Debo also? In the expert survey, you're like, I think the only one in our expert survey, I think like 80% of our experts here, our analysts here, are like, who's the best contrarian play? Debo Samuel. And you're the only one that's like, I'm going to be under on Debo Samuel.
Yeah, he's a little bit too expensive. I feel like at 9,200, right? Like it's only 800 less than Brock Purdy. And then you're getting all of the other San Francisco receivers and those passes that Christian McCaffrey can take to the house. I don't hate Debo Samuel. It's really more of a price thing. That I think he's maybe the guy that's too expensive out of the core guys that are above the kickers. I just think he's the guy that's most overpriced. And like, especially and this is kind of a DraftKings specific thing, that like Christian McCaffrey can put up such a monster score that even at 12,000, like maybe he should be more expensive. Like I initially looked at the pricing and thought, McCaffrey's 12,000. Like you can get him off of the lineup and then you're getting a ton more money. There's not that much you can get, removing Christian McCaffrey from your lineup. Like Christian McCaffrey should probably be more expensive than 12,000. That's not necessarily true on FanDuel. That is actually a little bit different on FanDuel. McCaffrey, I think it's like 17,500, which is like, it's like easier to get a lineup without McCaffrey, or like easier to like take him off the lineup at that price. He's like way more expensive than the quarterbacks at that price, and by far the most expensive player on the FanDuel price list. But on DraftKings, I think the guy that's overpriced is probably Debo.
You also have to admit that the distribution of his outcomes is way kind of asymmetric, where like Debo compared to some of these other people, I mean, he could put up 40 fantasy points, but it's on less plays. McCaffrey could walk into 40 fantasy points and because he has 36 touches in the game. Debo, it's kind of like, he could score 2 big plays and get you there. So you're playing him for that type of outcome. And then Rashee Rice, you mentioned underpriced players. I mean, the props that he has available now, I mean, really, he should be probably closer to 10,000 also. Is there a world? I mean, of course there is. Rashee Rice captain, but without Patrick Mahomes in the flex spot, because a lot of people, do the correlation. It makes sense. If Rashee Rice puts up a big game, probably Patrick Mahomes correlates with that, but Mahomes is 10-6. Are there lineups that you're making where you are, because Christian McCaffrey obviously playing captain without Purdy makes total sense. I mean, rushing touchdowns don't help Purdy, right? I mean, obviously swing passes, everything like that. But with a guy like Rashee Rice, I mean, it makes sense to play Patrick Mahomes with them. But based on the pricing, I mean, there are worlds where there are plenty of outcomes where Rashee Rice 10 for 120 and a touchdown, and Pacheco, runs the ball in twice, and Mahomes is sitting there with 260 passing yards and 1 passing touchdown, and Pacheco beats him just raw point wise, or Kelsey even PPR wise, beats him point per dollar wise. What are your thoughts on, if you're not playing Christian McCaffrey in the captain, how are you building this lineup?
Yeah, so I do think Rashee Rice is probably on DraftKings probably the most underpriced of the guys above the kickers. Like George Kittle is a little bit less expensive than Rice, but he's Rice is going to have a much better projection. So yeah, actually, I think that's a really interesting way of building a lineup is put Rashee Rice in the captain. Don't have Patrick Mahomes. The guy I like adding to that lineup is Travis Kelce. And we're going with the San Francisco receptions underneath kind of build, right? And then you can get Christian McCaffrey in the flex. And like a kind of interesting build, right, is that leaves you is you could do it with no quarterbacks at all, right? Like you could say that maybe Christian McCaffrey gets a rushing touchdown or two. Maybe one other San Francisco guy gets a touchdown. The Chiefs offense is going through Travis Kelce, Rashee Rice with receptions and touchdowns. And you get a build with Rashee Rice in the captain and neither quarterback. And that's actually something that could play out, I think, in the game. And that's maybe a game that's not as many touchdowns. So maybe you're adding a kicker to that lineup. And that's a way that you would get probably pretty different without either quarterback at all, like in the captain or the flex, and have like Rashee Rice in the captain spot, maybe add a kicker, and it's like a plausible game story. It's not going to be that highly owned.
I want to go over one more possible lineup construction that may seem counterintuitive at first, but we've seen this happen before. In the case that production is condensed around very few amounts of people and they're all about even, you'll win with a cheap captain and the jam it in method. So let's say, for instance, I'm just using the case of Christian McCaffrey scores 25 fantasy points. Patrick Mahomes, 25 fantasy points. Kelce, 25 fantasy points. Rashee Rice, 25, like something like that. Something where, like, basically a lot, like 4 or 5 guys get like 18 to 24 fantasy points, and they're all expensive. And everyone else is like in the single digits because it's all going through those guys. The only way to fit those 5 guys in is to play like some 4K. So you're playing Chiefs defense in the captain. You're playing kicker captain. You're playing MVS in the captain. And even though MVS may only have like 6 fantasy points, 9 in the captain plus all of the other guys ends up being optimal. I know it's a weird way of making lineups, but out of all the games that we've seen with, the condensed offenses here, it's much more likely in this game than it would be on, Chargers Lions, where they throw the ball to like 18 different receivers and they have 2 running backs each. Like the production could go tons of places. Here, I don't think it is. So I wouldn't put past you if you wanted to, a Justin Watson captain lineup, CEH captain lineup, and jam everyone else in. You're not going to avoid duplication that way. It seems weird, but you're still going to get, even though the captain's going to be 0.6% owned, like everyone's using all their salary in those lineups anyway. So you'll still probably get 20, 30, 40, whatever dupes. But I don't think I think if it turned out that way, people on Twitter would be like, wow, this is weird. 9 points in captain 1. It's like no, this makes so much more sense, assuming that the production goes through like 4 people and it's all about even.
Yeah, you just have to guess the right 4 people. I don't love dropping below the kickers in that kind of build because like you actually when you start running optimal lineups, you do get like Kyle Juszczyk and Richie James like captain lineups, and that just kind of happens every showdown. Like unless that guy gets a touchdown, like you need the raw points too because like that multiplier does count for something. So like I've had those lineups before in showdown, and I'm watching the game, and it's like every time Travis Kelce or Rashee Rice or Christian McCaffrey gets a reception, like that's 1.5 points for somebody, right? And I've got this guy like Richie James or Clyde Edwards-Helaire who's like not on the field, and I just can't. Like even though I've got more, way more points in the flex, somebody's going to be passing me. Some lineup is going to be passing me with that 1.5 points that they get for the reception, or the 15, 1.5 yard points they get for 10 yards or whatever. or 9 points for the touchdown instead of 6. That multiplier does count for something. I think kicker, you can get there, right? Like, because Harrison Butker or Jake Moody could put up 12 points. They could put up 15 points with a couple of long field goals and some extra points. And then, some of these guys are scoring touchdowns and they're getting the 1.5 for the extra point. But I don't love dropping below the kicker in that kind of, cheap captain lineup, even though it will show up in optimizers.
Well, you're going to have your article out, I'm assuming today, hitting the nuts, right? And you said, John, that you don't mind sharing the $1 million with a whole bunch of people, right? I mean, like, you're like, okay, solo is probably out of the question, but $84,000, you're fine with a 20 team tie. So basically, this article is for the 19 other people to know how to hit the nuts to share it with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm heading to Phoenix tomorrow for the DraftKings King of the Desert. So it'll be it'll be the DraftKings showdown format, me against 14 other people for a $500,000 first place prize. Though it's not really 14 other people, because I think Utica, Chipotle Addict, and Papa Gates have 7 out of the 15 entries between the 3 of them. Then it's me and a handful like Hishbu has, I think, won $2 million prizes on DraftKings.
What is the king of the desert?
So it's like the king of the beach, where it was like it started off with like 150 qualifiers, I think, then cut down to 50.
Is that for NFL or is that NBA?
It was NFL. So NFL and golf. So they're doing
and golf. Okay.
Yeah. So, but it's like 2 separate live finals. So 15 people for golf, 15 people for NFL.
Yeah, but the golf already started, right?
Yeah. So it is actually weird because I did a bunch of like golf lineups for the Waste Management Open, and that's actually the event. You can go to the Waste Management Open. I'm just going, tomorrow instead of having gone out yesterday. But like I entered these DFS lineups yesterday. I'm watching the scoring today, and I'll be there like tomorrow or Sunday or whatever when the contest actually concludes for the Waste Management Open.
Well, I think the Phoenix Open may actually end after the Super Bowl.
I think so. And there's a frost delay, which is weird. I was like packing and I saw like my lineups aren't updating because there's a frost delay for round 2, and I realized like I was like 30 degrees off in my estimate of the temperature. I was like, oh, it's gonna be like 80 degrees.
Think you're going to Phoenix, Arizona. Like, why is there a frost delay?
Yeah, no, it's gonna be like a high of like in the high 50s one of the days that I'm gonna be there. So it's like, oh, I gotta unpack all this stuff. I don't need these like beach t-shirts. I can pack some sweaters.
Well, you'll have your Hitting the Nuts article out soon. You could get that if you're a premium member here at RotoGrinders. So click on the link in the description. Get $10 off your first month. Use SimLabs. We got PGA SimLabs now, in addition to NBA SimLabs.
Is that
Use the SimLabs for the Super Bowl. You could do that as well. MMA tomorrow. You're going to be out, John. You're out. You're going to be in Phoenix. I'm going to be replacing you on Crunch Time tomorrow.
Okay.
So and it's a 14 fight card. So like,
well,
and it's a lot of garbage people. You know how much I love those. Lots of fights, lots of bad fighters. Beautiful. I did well last week in MMA. I made money. And a lot of times when you're playing large field GPPs, just making money is a successful. It's in and of itself, right? That you didn't lose 40% like you normally do.
Yeah, absolutely. Usually I lose money. I try to explain that to my wife. like how did last night go? Like, I lost money, but that usually happens. Don't worry. Tell Mike Brown to say hi. You'll be replacing me on Crunch Time. It is a blender card from the appearance of it. I haven't like dove too deep into it. There is, I think, the 2 highest priced fighters are like not particularly unappealing. I think it's Luma, who like generally doesn't score well, although I think she went berserk last fight. And then there's like a kind of what ended up being a mispricing because there's a very highly favored fighter. His opponent got scratched, and they replaced him with like a better fighter. Interesting like contrarian play up there. But like the 2 highest priced fighters, probably not that appealing. And it's 14 fights, I think, as of now. I think weigh-ins will be new. I think it's an Apex card. So weigh-ins will be starting here shortly. We'll see if it sticks at 14 fights.
Right. But you could check out the Crunch Time tomorrow. Hit that notification bell to know when we go live. Always hit that thumbs up button. Give me the thumbs. Hit the subscribe button. We got NBA Grinders live later today, as well as Crunch Time for NBA. We got some NBA games. You got props and pick 'em. I already got tons of props in for today. NHL, we only got 3 games. We got tons of stuff for you here at RotoGrinders. So always check out our content. Join us in the Discord, which is free. It shouldn't be free, but it is. RotoGrinders.com/Discord. John, good luck. And bring your winter. I can't believe you need to bring your winter coat.
Yeah.
To Phoenix for the king. It's the king of the desert. And based on the frost, maybe it should be king of the dessert.
Yeah, exactly. Just taking S out. Yeah. I got plenty of DraftKings hoodies. I'll just pack a few of them and head out. They got a nice sports book there actually on the golf course. So it'd be cool. That I think that's where we're actually going to be watching the Super Bowl. So that should be a good time. And got couple of DFS, goals to accomplish. One of them is winning a football live final. The other is winning a DraftKings live final. I think I've finished second, third, and fourth twice. So hopefully take down first, and I'll take it even if it's a tie, either contest.
Well, I'll be back on Monday. We'll review the big game showdown slate with James McCool on Monday. What ended up winning. All that type of stuff. And I'm back as usual, right? This is what we do in the morning, Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock Eastern, talking about all things you're thinking about in daily fantasy, props, and pick 'em on RotoGrinders Today.